What about planting the seeds? How long does it take to plant? Oh, maybe the store was out of the plant you need. Maybe your little growth things aren't ready yet, and I'll give you a few days, which is way more time than you really need to plant. Now you've planted. Now it comes time to take care of the plant. Anybody grow up weeding the garden? Oh man, if there's any childhood memory that has scarred me, it's weeding the garden. Because you weed the garden during summer vacation, all summer long. Yes or no? So you can plow right away. You can plant pretty quickly. But notice, even in the agricultural cycle, how long it takes to cultivate. Cultivation is a huge process. And yet, when it comes to Seventh-day Adventist Church members who are like, hey, yeah, I'm willing to help give Bible studies, there are precious few. And so there's a bottleneck that forms there sometimes. That's the most labor-intensive part of the process. Well, Lord willing, you do Bible studies, and somebody's learning the truth, and they're beginning to apply the truth, and they say, you know what? I want to become one of God's people. I want to commit myself to Jesus. I want to join his church. I want to be part of the mission of the church. I want to be baptized. That's the little yellow, that's the little gold harvest that we have in the harvest cycle. Praise God, we're celebrating, hallelujah, and we've got a baptism. We saw some pictures of baptisms today. Baptisms are exciting. Unfortunately, for some, I'm going to say, unfortunately, for a lot of our churches over the years, we've fallen into the mindset of thinking that we're done at baptism with the cycle of leading souls into the truth. But if you recall a time when you first came into the truth and you took your stand, it's really not super healthy to be abandoned once you're baptized, right? On to greater new territory. No, that's a time especially that new members need to be taught and review things and integrated into the church. And so that little red part of the growth cycle is what we call preservation, right? Just like when the farmer goes, can you imagine a farmer harvesting his field and have those big bins? You ever see those big bins? And they're filled up with grain, and he just leaves it out there for the rest of the, I mean, your winters here aren't our winters back east, but still, you just wouldn't leave the grain in the bin. You need to do something with it. You need to store it. You need to freeze it. You need to package it. You need to whatever you're going to do with it. I'm not suggesting we package people when we come into the church, but you understand that once a person makes that decision to become part of the church, there's a whole new training that takes place. Now you're not just being taught, basic fundamental beliefs. You're taught how to be a worker in the cause of Christ. That's supposed to be how it goes. Jesus said we are to make disciples, and that's the discipleship process. And once a person is trained to be a disciple, what do you think they should be doing? They start discipling somebody else, right? And then the cycle. And so the idea is this I shouldn't say should be. This is going on all the time. I don't know everybody in this room. I don't know where you are in your experience, but I will guarantee you're in one of those wheels of experience. Everybody is. I had a lady, I was training on this last weekend, and that's why it says Grow Livingston. I was at the Livingston Church. I should have changed it today. But I was training, and she said, well, what if, because this is a GC thing, and there's this logo, and we get into, it's like, oh, we're training, and we're doing this. She says, what if a person, what if you're not necessarily bought into the logo or the package or the project or the pitch or whatever? And I said, it doesn't matter. Because what you're looking at here is what every person will have to go through to take their stand in the church. You can call it what you want. You don't have to call it the plant phase and the prepare phase and the cultivate phase or any phase, and you don't have to call it the growth cycle. But everybody who comes into truth first has to have their heart prepared to receive the word of God. It just happens. And ironically, this lady that asked the question was telling me she was, and this came up earlier in the training, she said she was a health educator, and she said, look, I work with people in health education, and she said they know how they're supposed to live. They know what they're supposed to eat and not eat and all that, but she said it's a different thing from knowing it and getting them to do it. Now, I'm assuming here in Loma Linda we have some health educators here that resonate with what I'm talking about. Oh, yeah, I've worked with people, and boy, getting them to try to do what they know full well what they should be doing. I mean, who am I to? We've all had our share of that more than likely ourselves, right? So she asked the question, what about, I said, listen, you step outside of everything we're talking about here with so many evangelism. I said, even in your health ministry, you know that this is the same process you go through. You have to win people's confidence before you can get them to be open to take your advice and apply your advice. And then once they begin to apply your advice, you've got to begin to teach them in a practical way and like Bible studies and walk them along and take them by the hand until now they're committed to take their stand. And Lord willing, even in something like that, I mean, this could be in any profession or whatever, which I'm not going to get off into. This is the process people go through. Okay, so I'm laying that as a groundwork to say this. I've got a responsibility God's given me. You've got a responsibility God's given you. Because I'm a pastor here, but outside of this room, and this may alarm you, I'm just a person, just like you're a person. And I have a personal responsibility for my neighbor like you have a personal responsibility for your neighbor. And I can't reach your neighbor like you can reach your neighbor, and you can't reach my neighbor like I can reach my neighbor. You understand what I'm saying? Brothers and sisters, do you understand? We are not secularists. We believe in a God. We're not deists either, by the way. You know what a deist is? There's a creator God, and he created things, and he spun them off, and tossed the earth out somewhere, and he moved on to some other project. We believe in a personal God, an interactive God, a God that doesn't work randomly, a God who has placed each one of us here at this time, in this place, in your job, in your neighborhood, in your circle of friends for such a time as this. There is nothing accidental in your life. I'll never forget a member of mine coming up, and he was like, Pastor, you won't believe it. I had this neighbor I was talking to the other night. He just moved in, and he's into motorcycles just like I'm into motorcycles. Go figure. And I said, yeah, go figure, brother. Could be there's a God who put you there, that neighborhood. He knew what was going to happen. How many believe that there is a God who directs the things even in your life? How many believe that? Nothing happens by accident. You have people in your circle of influence, and the Lord wants you to use your influence to reach them for the kingdom. Everybody needs to go through this process. You know people that are somewhere in this stage of things. If you were to think through your circle of influence, there are people that you know that don't know the gospel, that haven't expressed any interest in the gospel. They're up there in that prepare phase of the growth cycle. You've got to plant the seed, not quite sure how yet, but the seed hasn't even been planted. You have other people you know that they've heard some spiritual things, maybe from you, from somebody else, and there's a level of interest, but it's never been cultivated. You understand what I'm saying? You've got people that maybe you're studying with. You've got people that have had studies somewhere else along the line. Every one of us knows people around us. We may not know where they are in the cycle, but they're somewhere in the cycle. So for me personally, and I'm using myself as an example because we're all in the same boat, if I'm a disciple of Christ, I've got to ask myself, first of all, Lord, I'll get into this in a minute. Where are they in that cycle? And how do I help them advance in that cycle? How can I lead the people in my circle of influence into the truth? Now, I'm going to introduce a resource to you. You are the second group. Livingston Church was the first. Second group to lay eyes on this yet-to-be-released resource. My brother Jim works in the Sabbath School and Personal Ministries department in the General Conference. And before I get too far ahead of that, how many of you are aware of the Sabbath School app, the GC Sabbath School app? Far more of you should be so. You're going to be when I'm done. In fact, I wish I'd thought about it to put it up on the screen. But if you go on your Android phone or your iPhone and you do go to the App Store and you look up Sabbath School, you'll find an app that's called the official General Conference Sabbath School app. In that app, and I'd show you the icon. You can't see anything on my phone anyway, so some of you up close can see that in the Sabbath School app, you have the quarterly there. You have older quarterlies there, the adult lesson, right? If you scroll down, you've got the inverse lesson. Oh, there's an easy reading version. Did you know that? Teacher's quarterly, you're like, oh, I got the regular one. I wish I had the teacher's one. Hey, it's in the app for free. And then all the junior division quarterlies are all right there. So that's handy. But what a lot of people do not realize, a recent feature, is that there are tabs on my iPad. They're on the top. In my iPhone, they're on the bottom. But there's this middle tab that has a circle with 3 lines. That's the globe and 3 angels, right? That is the Personal Ministries tab of the app. When I click on that, there is a resource for your church to help your church. If you're a leader in your church and you're working with other leaders in the church board, there's a church planner that walks your church into how to plan to be more evangelistic as a church. There's a disciple-making evangelism plan for your church. There is a resource called the Discipleship Handbook in here for working to disciple new members. And there's a mentor's guide, which I'll touch on in a little bit. But those resources are in here. There's a whole bunch of resources from over the years on, like here's one on reclaiming missing members, how to plan for public evangelism, and a whole bunch of stuff, okay? Anyway, how many of you know about the book Studying Together by Mark Finley? You ever see that book? Now, let me just tell you about the book Studying Together. I've used it in training for years. It's got little Bible studies on just about every topic. And that's helpful. But the thing I always liked the most that was invaluable in Mark Finley's book, Studying Together, is there's a section on like a crash course on what every other faith believes. So Presbyterians, Catholics, Baptists, Hindus, Taoists, all of these different. So if I'm going to minister to somebody, it's helpful for me to know where they're coming from, right? You're like, what is my Muslim friend at work? Where do they come? You know, I should know this, but I don't know this. Right there in the app, Studying Together. And there's a few of them there. One has Bible studies and one has, but I'm looking at the one that says Understanding Churches. And again, I don't want to go spend too much time because you don't all have it in front of you. I want you to know it's there. And it's there for free. And it's a great resource when you're trying to find out how to minister to somebody. We talk often about ministering to people where they are. You've heard that, right? How are you supposed to minister to somebody where they are if you don't know where they are? We love to say this kind of stuff. It's like, oh, we'll minister where they are. And we all, do you know where your neighbors are? Do you know where your coworkers are in this? You know where they are in this cycle of evangelism? Do you know where they are, their spiritual receptiveness? Do you know what their background is? These are the kinds of things that we can begin to be intentional about at least finding out. That's going to be a huge step in successfully reaching other people. So I'm just sharing you resources in this Sabbath School app. Now, one other thing that I want to refer you to is the last little tab is the devotional tab. And there are some Bible and Spirit of Prophecy reading plans that are all contained there in the app too from the Discipleship Handbook, but they put it in the app. And so that is a great resource. Now, all that aside, some of those are more personal. There is a resource that they are this close to releasing. I keep asking. I wanted to print a bunch of copies from my department and give to churches I've trained in. And they keep saying, not yet, not yet. It's not official yet. So, okay, I can show it on the screen. But this is a practical, well, it's just what it says. My disciple-making journal. Okay, here I am as a church member. I want to lead souls into the truth. I have people in my circle of influence. How do I go about doing that? This resource will probably be available in the app. It's also going to be available for print. And again, I can't give you all the details yet. It's not released. They've made it to be size-wise, I want to say, kind of probably about this wide and this high. It's one of these personal pocket. Any of you old enough to remember day timers and day planners? It kind of follows that idea. It's like a day planner for personal soul winning. Why would you make such a thing? How would this help a church member? Do you think if you spent more time thinking and planning about reaching souls, you might actually do more trying to reach souls? You've got to sometimes bring things into people's consciousness. And I'm afraid that as Seventh-day Adventists, it has totally flown out of most of our consciousnesses that we are called to win souls for Christ. And all we run into is some hiccup experience where it's like, oh, quick, we're at the restaurant. Do I have a globe tract? Well, that's great, but that's not leading souls into the truth. We don't spend enough time thinking about our neighbors and praying specifically for our neighbors and planning, how am I going to reach my neighbor? What are they interested in? What are their hobbies? What kind of avenue can I take to connect with them? Now, when I talk, and I don't have it on the screen, but when I talked about the growth cycle, you know that's just a graphic representation of that famous statement by Ellen White in Ministry of Healing, page 143, about Christ's method alone. You familiar with that? Christ's method alone will bring true success in reaching the people. It's a bold statement. There's a book by Philip Simon called, what is it called? Christ's Way of Reaching. Somebody help me with that. Christ's Way of Reaching People, or something like that. And now here's the funny thing about it, whether you know the book or not. Philip Simon, seminary professor at Southern Adventist University, wrote this book, and he wanted to title it, in fact, he titled it Christ's Method Alone. And the publisher said, that sounds a little exclusive, doesn't it? Yes, it does. But that's what it says in Ministry of Healing 143. And the reason it says that is because it is exclusive. You can try any other method besides Christ's method, and guess what? It's not going to be successful. Is that a newsflash to anybody here? Christ's method alone will be successful. And then she goes on, she says, he mingled with men as one who desired their good. He showed his sympathy to them. He won their he showed his sympathy to them. He ministered to their needs, and he won their confidence. And then he bade them follow me. You're familiar with the statement. Okay, all that is that growth cycle. Jesus knew. Why did Jesus try to win people's confidence? Because he wanted them to be receptive to the truth. If you have people that you're trying to reach for Christ, it's essential that you win their confidence. Right? So do we just happen to win people's confidence? Or do you need to be somewhat deliberate to win people's confidence? If you want to see a soul in the kingdom, is it worth your time and effort to win their confidence? This is what we're talking about. So this little resource is trying to get church members, Seventh-day Adventist members, to get less distracted from all the things around us and more active and intentional about the work the Lord's given us like the early church was. And so we've got and I'm going to walk you through some pieces of it. You've got the phases of the evangelism cycle and a little description. Prepare the soil of the heart by offering kindness, compassion, and fellowship. Just some practical tips. Plant seeds of truth by sharing literature, media, and spiritual invitations, etc. Now, I'm going to pass that up. I'm not going to, bury you with the details here, but I just want you to here's what I want you to understand. I'm not selling you a resource here. I'm wanting you to understand that if you're really a member who wants to win souls for Christ, you don't need the resource, but you need to be doing what the resource is suggesting. We have got to be more intentional about reaching people. And for some of us, we have an idea where to begin, and some of us don't. So this resource actually will walk you through. Here, you notice this page here. Prepare the soil of the heart, right? That's where you start in the cycle. You've got to prepare the heart. How do you do that? How do you win people's confidence? Well, here are some suggestions. Genuine acts of kindness, compassion, and fellowship can lead people to open their hearts to learning about God or the Bible. Here are several ways to develop friendship interests and to continue building a trusting relationship throughout the disciple-making journey. Okay, here's a handful of them. Mingle and visit, strike up a conversation, and be a sympathizing listener. They're kind of generic. They're intended to be because you've got to apply it to your context, but that's pretty obvious, I think, right? Mingle with people. Strike up conversations with people. The next bullet point, invite your friend home for a meal or to do a project or activity together. These are just suggestions. They're not exhaustive. You may come up with something else besides this. The next bullet point says minister to a need. Prepare a meal, babysit. Find some kind of need that your neighbor has. Oh, wow, they're elderly, and they've got all kind of leaves around their lawn, and they need raked. I don't know that you have a lot of leaves to rake out here. Not sure how that works. I was going to mention plowing snow, but I know that's not a thing for most of you. But, finding a need, there could be another need. But these are things that take a little bit of thought. The next bullet point says give a gift that would be meaningful. Invite your friend to a cooking school or a social event at your church, okay? So there's different ideas. Now, to me, it gets more interesting when we get to the next. So the first section kind of walks you through, this is what it means. These are the different steps that a person would go through. Now, how do I go about leading a person through those steps? Section 2 is the think and pray section. It says here, think of everyone you know who needs to experience salvation through Jesus Christ, a greater understanding of Bible truth or spiritual guidance, nurture and support. Use the blank list provided to write down these names, and then pray each day that God will open the hearts of the names on your list and for wisdom to know how to lead them to become active disciples of Jesus. Right? And then this is the next page. What do you do on a page like this? You think of everybody you know that you're trying to reach for Christ, and you write down their name. Now, we know people that are in our circle of influence, but for many of us, we haven't written their name down, and now, I don't know, I'm going to process through. The purpose of this is to kind of give us a little bit of a kickstart in doing what perhaps we may have been more intentional about doing in the past. We should have been. So I've got coworkers, I've got neighbors, I've got friends. I'm going to write them. This is the first section of this. Listen, this resource is just holding my hand to do something that I've kind of been reluctant to do, and it's saying, come on. I don't know if I want to do it. Come on, yeah, but you've got friends. I know, but I'm not really good at this, and it's nudging me along. It's nudging you along. It's nudging us along. This is the plan. This is the what did I say? The think and plan. Think and pray. I'm going to put those names on the list, and I'm going to begin praying for those people. If you've not been in a habit of this, or maybe you've gone in and out of this kind of thing, I'm going to tell you that even though you have people that you want to see in the kingdom, and maybe you have prayed for them here or there, if you put their names on a list like this, and you begin praying for them every day, it is going to begin to change your whole outlook. I guarantee you that. If you don't believe me, you can't disagree with me until you try it. So try it and then tell me I'm wrong. You're not going to do it, because I'm going to tell you that by beholding we become changed, and that principle works with things like this. You'll notice that when you begin thinking about people's salvation and praying for their salvation, you start thinking more about everybody's salvation. It just has that effect. Now, this is the first section, but this is where it gets interesting to me. This is the plan and do section. Because I know members who have done that think and pray section, and that's as far as they get. Okay, so I've got my neighbor Bob, and I've got I'll just use my neighbor because my neighbor's name is Mark. Easy to remember, right? So I've got my neighbor Mark over here. I've got my coworker. I've got I've got them on my list. Now I'm going to take some deliberate time to think, what can I do to reach Mark? Now, this may take a little investigation on my part. You may have somebody in your circle of influence. This is going to take some investigation. How am I going to reach them? What am I going to do? You might have to just start out with some, if you haven't done it yet, just some basic conversations. Just asking them about their interests and their job. I know you told me once, but I forget what it is you do for a living. And just start learning about it. Sometimes if you're not there yet, you're going to start, because the idea with plan and do is that you're going to start coming up with things you're going to try. And I want to emphasize that word try. I'd love to tell you, saints, in all the years I've been soul winning, doing soul winning training, I'd love to tell you that there's one little trick. In fact, members, I think it's like, okay, here it is. You guys twisted my arm. I'm going to tell you the one little trick that works every time. I don't tell people this because I want to look better at it than you do, but now I'm going to cave in. No, there isn't one little trick. I wish there was, and I could tell you, and it's like, you do this. But every situation is different, so you've got to try things. And so I've got my neighbor. I've tried things with my neighbor. I'm just going to tell you, my neighbor next door to me, brothers and sisters, sometimes you try one thing after another and you don't seem to be getting anywhere. I understand how that works. I used to think if I became a pastor, it would be easier. Because we all talk about what we do for a living. What do you do for a living? Oh, I'm a welder. Oh, I work as an accountant. What do you do for a living? I'm a pastor. Right? Oh, we're obviously going to be talking about spiritual things right now, right? I'm a pastor, so that opens the way. Oh, no, people will do this. Oh, well, I've got something going on, and something's on the stove or whatever else. I don't know what it is, but people are intimidated by talking to pastors. A lot of them, not all of them, but so it didn't go I'm just telling you, I don't have the right answer all the time. My wife and I have been praying for our neighbors and trying to come up with, and we take them little gifts and do things like that. I don't know what the solution is, but I'm going to keep trying. But being intentional about it helps you make more headway. So in the booklet, there's an activity. This is a sample log of what you might do in your. So you've got some people that you need to just build the friendships with. You're going to also have action lists for people you're going to try to give literature to. You're going to have action items for some of the people you know that you think are ready for Bible studies, and you're going to ask them for Bible studies. So you have different lists. This list says, notice the sample. Well, I'll just read you a few items. Invite neighbors Mike and Lindsay to dinner. Okay? Mike and Lindsay might say no. And this is where a lot of us fail. We're like, yeah, Mike and Lindsay will probably say no, so I'm not going to ask them. What? We've got to try, because the Lord has given us a responsibility of leading souls into the truth. There's part of the life of faith is stepping out and doing things that we don't see how they're going to work and trusting God's going to make them work. And of all things, winning souls for the kingdom is something God is more than willing to help you in. I'm going to invite him over to dinner, see how that goes. I'm going to go hiking with my coworker Sam at a state park. We got to talking, and he likes doing that. And he's not open to Bible studies right now, but maybe if I can connect with him on this thing that he's interested in, we're going to go fly drones together. We're going to go do this together. Maybe I can build up a little bit of rapport that might open him up, or maybe it'll just teach me how open he is. But I'm going to try it. I'm going to put it on my list. Give Christmas cookies to next-door neighbors. Invite Cousin Julio to cooking school. Go caroling and invite church neighborhood to Christmas program. Okay, you get the idea. I'm not telling you anything here that you probably don't know somewhere. The challenge is we are not, by and large, and you may be the exception to this rule, but by and large, we are not planning to win souls. We put energy and attention into planning how to make sure we pass the course and get the degree and get the job and get the promotion and every other thing in this life, but we spend precious little time planning how to win souls. You read the life of Jesus and you're going to find that Jesus' life was not happenstance witnessing. You read about the story of Zacchaeus, and he went and took that road. It was deliberate. It was a deliberate shift in his course so that he would intersect there to meet Zacchaeus and the blind man on the way out of town. He was deliberate in his soul winning. He was deliberate with the woman at the well and how he approached and what he did. And he's modeling for you and me how we also need to think more about. Now look, for some of you, what I'm saying right now is just like, you've never even given thought to it. And it may seem just so far off, like I don't know how that would help. Just take my word for it. If you're going to reach souls for Christ, you've got to step forward somehow. And again, I'm referring to this resource. There's more to the resource. But you've got to step forward and lay some practical plans and challenge yourself to do some practical things. What does James tell us? You have not because you ask not. I told you I was going to tell you this afternoon about my trick, my tip, whatever that I give in training. In fact, it was something that my brother and I learned, and maybe I've shared it out here before. But we went to, before I was ever in pastoral ministry, I went to a camp meeting, and there was a preacher there named Tony Sirigliano. Love that brother. He has passed away since. He was a postman who converted to the Sabbath truth and was a soul-winning trainer and an excellent evangelist and pastor. But Pastor Tony, I was a new member, and I went to his seminar at a camp meeting in Pennsylvania. And I was in that seminar, and Pastor Tony shared what he called Pastor Tony's surefire method of getting a Bible study. I got to hear this. Now, at this point in my experience, I was a new member, but I'd been around enough to know it wasn't so easy getting Bible studies. I'd gone around, I'd knocked on doors, I'd follow up interest, I'd ask people, and it wasn't as easy as it might seem. So when he said the surefire method, I was a little skeptical. My brother Jim, who I mentioned works at the General Conference, neither of us were in ministry. We were new into the church. We're sitting in this guy's seminar. There's probably 22 people in this little classroom on the Blue Mountain Academy campus. And here's his method. He talks about the woman at the well and how Jesus, when approaching the woman at the well, instead of offering to give her a drink, he asks her for a favor. You remember the story? He asks her for a drink, and he builds on that, and he says, asking somebody for help elicits their desire to help you more than if you offer to do something for them. And so he says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to think of somebody that you've wanted to study with but have been afraid to ask. And I want you to call them up. Now, call them up in those days meant finding the pay phone on the campus. We didn't all carry phones in our pockets. He said, I want you to call them up and say, I'm taking a class right now. He said, which you are right here at this camp meeting. I'm taking a class, and in order for me to successfully complete it, I need to share some Bible studies with somebody. I'm a little nervous about this, and I was wondering if you'd be willing to help me out and let me share some Bible studies with you. He said, how many of you here will take me up on that? I'd say about 7 hands went up. No, about 5 hands that first day. About 5 hands went up in the room. Mine was not one of them. I'm like, that's not going to work. So the next day, because it's a 5-day seminar, next day he starts out the class and he goes, how many of you guys made those calls yesterday? People raised their hands. He said, how many of you had a yes for that Bible study? 4 out of 5. He said, okay, how many of you today are willing to do the same thing? Well, I raised my hand. My brother Jim raised his hand. 5 others, about 7 of us raised our hands. I called my cousin who said no. My brother Jim called our younger brother Ron who said yes. Now, I'll finish that in a minute, and then 5, and I think out of the 5 of us we had, or 7 of us, we had 5 yeses and 2 nos. Okay? I have since then, I've lost count of the trainings, challenged people with that. And I told you this morning about the girl who came and that's the method I tell them you're taking a class. Let me just clarify for you right now. I just told you you have to lead somebody into the truth, and that's not a burden I placed on you. The Lord placed it on you, but he told me as a minister that I'm supposed to teach you that. And until you do that, you're not completed with your course. So every one of you can legitimately use what I just said and say, you know what? I'm in this course learning how to be a more effective witness for Christ, but in order for me to complete it, I've got to share some Bible studies. I'm a little nervous about it. Now, you don't have to say it just that way. You can modify it. So I teach that to people. This girl went and called her 5 friends because she was sure all 5 would say no. All 5 said yes. I had a guy come to the training we did in Cadillac, Michigan. We've done them all over the places. And he came to the, I shared this, and he came up to me afterwards. He's like, all right. He was a little frustrated, actually, with me. And he said, all right, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do, you've been challenged to do this, and I'll go ask my brother. I'm just going to tell you, I've asked him before. He always says no. He's going to say no again. But just to appease you, he comes back the next day. He's like, I don't know what happened. He always says no. But I asked him, and he said yes. Now, here's the thing that I want to get at. It's not a trick. It's not a special sleight of hand. You have not because you ask not. You're never going to get the Bible study you don't ask for. Nobody's ever going to take the piece of literature you don't give out. And God can't bless the piece of literature you don't give out, or the Bible study you're not willing to give, or the words you're not willing to say to somebody. Pastor Cameron puts it this way. How does he say it? It's better to risk failure by saying something than to guarantee failure by saying nothing or doing nothing. So I would conclude by saying, I want to challenge you this afternoon in light of the fact that the Lord Jesus has laid a burden upon each of you, myself included, to lead souls into the truth, that no later than tomorrow morning you are on your knees and saying, Lord, I take that challenge. I need you to help me be more intentional about ministering to people in my circle of influence. I'm not telling you to go door to door to a bunch of cold call strangers. You know people now. They're in your circle of influence now. Now, I'm not telling you you're getting them a Bible study right now. Maybe you're asking them over to dinner. Maybe you're offering to do some kind deed for them. But as God's people, it is high time that we begin to be more intentional about thinking about and planning about winning souls than we are about our degrees and our jobs and everything else that we do. Not that we shouldn't plan for those things as well. But we need to be invested in the very thing our Master poured out his life for. He did not just pour out his life on Calvary's cross for you. He poured it out for your neighbor and your coworker. And as followers for Jesus, we need to carry that same burden of heart. And listen, saints, when we do, and we put forth efforts in that direction, as feeble as they might seem to us, the Lord will multiply them to the salvation of souls. Amen? I want to conclude with this is stuff I wasn't going to go into today, so you are missing some good stuff, but it was from another training. But I want to finish with, this statement here. Ministry of Healing 143. Now, I loosely quoted the Christ Method Alone statement. Most Adventists are somewhat familiar with that. Christ Method Alone will bring true success. This is the very next paragraph that a lot of people don't go into or quote. There is need of coming close to the people by what? What does personal effort mean? That means you, not the evangelist, not the pastor, not the church. Personal effort by individuals in the church who are disciples for Jesus Christ, who are intimately connected with a person who's a coworker or a neighbor that nobody else is connected with. There's need of coming close to the people by personal effort. If less time were given to sermonizing and more time were spent in personal ministry, greater results would be seen. Notice what it goes on to say. The poor are to be relieved. Right? This isn't just giving tracts. It isn't just giving Bible studies. Every kind of way we can connect with somebody, begin to build those relationships and friendships is a way of gaining their confidence and opening the door for leading them to Jesus. The poor to be relieved, the sick cared for, the sorrowing and bereaved comforted, the ignorant